Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our third session of the Gita in a Nutshell course. Our topic for today is quite interesting. It deals with our mind and the vital role that it plays in our multi-life journey. So let's get started with a quick prayer. ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः. So, right in the beginning, we would like to express gratitude to certain personalities who we all really owe so much gratitude. First of all, we all owe our gratitude to Lord Shri Krishna for speaking the Bhagavad Gita, this beautiful granth or literature that has nourished mankind for so many generations. Then we are grateful to Arjun for asking these questions that led to the Bhagavad Gita. We are grateful to all the great saints and sages who have preserved this pristine message of the Gita. We are grateful to the chain of temples called ISKCON that so diligently and with so many sacrifices tries to spread these wonderful teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. We are highly grateful to the founder of ISKCON, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who made so many personal sacrifices to bring this message of Lord Krishna to the Western world and spread it all over the world. And we are grateful to each one of you for joining us. So let's get started with our session for today. We'll do a quick recap of session 2. So in the last session, we saw that Lord Krishna, we discussed how the Bhagavad Gita begins, how the first chapter of the Gita is mainly spoken by, who is the prominent speaker in the first chapter of the Gita? It's Arjun. And second chapter onward, the main teachings of Bhagavad Gita begin. And you can guess who is the main speaker, second chapter onward. Yes, it's Lord Shri Krishna. So, the main message of the Gita begins with verse 2.11, and it's a very powerful message. It's a strong, don't worry message. And the instructive portion of Bhagavad Gita, it even ends with a don't worry message. So can you imagine the instructive part of Bhagavad Gita? What do we mean by instructive part of Bhagavad Gita? The portion where Lord Krishna is giving some teachings and instructions to Arjun, and through Arjun to the entire mankind. And the beginning of the instructive portion of Gita is a don't worry message, and even the end of the Bhagavad Gita, of the instructive portion of Bhagavad Gita, is another don't worry message. Now, if whoever remembers the answer to this, please try to recall what we discussed in the last session. On what reality is the very first don't worry message of Lord Krishna based on? The don't worry message in Bhagavad Gita 2.11. On what reality is it based on? The answer is it's based on self-realization, our existence beyond matter. And what is the last don't worry message based on? The don't worry message in Bhagavad Gita 18.66. And that is based on God realization, connection with God. Now, together, these two, that is self-realization and God realization, they form the basis of a spiritual way of life. So what are the two main limbs of spiritual realization? One is self-realization and second is God realization. Self-realization is about understanding who we essentially are. Are we just a lump of flesh and bones, somehow formed by a conglomeration of chemicals, or are we something beyond that? Or are we something beyond the time factor? Hmm? So, self realization is about that, and God realization is about knowing God and knowing our relationship with God. Hmm? So, together, these two form the basis of a spiritual way of life. Those who uh, are immersed into self realization as well as God realization, they can steadily march on the pathway of transcendence. Hmm? So, together, these two form a spiritual way of life. Now, someone may say, oh, well, self realization, what's there to know in that? Fine, I know there is some, we have some paranormal existence, we have some non material existence. I have seen lots of horror movie shows. बहुत देखे है हमने ये भूत प्रेत आत्मा वाली serial. Someone may say that, right? So, yeah, what's so new about it? Well, even if we may have watched some horror movie shows or some shows on haunting and so on, has it really led to any positive transformation in us? All it does is it gives some temporary thrill, which is actually not beneficial for someone. Hmm? It can get one disoriented. Imagine watching such shows and then one day someone is left alone in a room. Then, yeah, that knowledge, it's detrimental in one sense on the mind. But this knowledge of self-realization, what Lord Krishna reveals in the first portion of the Bhagavad Gita, verses 2.11 to 2.30, Atma Gyan, knowledge about our existence as the Atma. hmm, That knowledge is uplifting. It makes us confident and it makes us fearless. Hmm. So, and what did we see as some modern proofs for the existence of the Atma? We saw some reincarnation case studies. Basically, what does a reincarnation case study mean? Someone, a small child, starts speaking some things which are totally unrelated to his or her current life, and uh, some investigation is done to try to verify what this child is speaking. And yeah, the child is actually referring to some other place somewhere else and some facts around that place. And then, yeah, there's a strong correlation between this child's current life and who this child was in the past. Hmm. So these are typical reincarnation case studies. Even a skeptic scientist, or we can say a researcher like Dr. Ian Stevenson, who had a very high bar to qualify any case as a reincarnation case study. With his high standards, he could still document around 2000 genuine reincarnation case studies. Besides this, we saw out of body experiences, or alternately called as near death experiences, where the Atma temporarily leaves the body and comes back into the body and recounts what he or she saw when he was out of the body. So that's therefore it's called out of body experience. And this field of studies, from what I know, began with a cardiologist called Dr. Michael Sabom. One of his patients actually was out of his body for some time, and then the patient recounted what he saw on the terrace of that hospital, while the fact was that the terrace was always locked to prevent any patients from going and committing suicide. So, but still, a patient who was being operated upon and who was completely on anesthesia, the patient accurately recounts what is there on the terrace. So, this was uh, an undeniable out of body experience. And then, besides that, we saw some simple intuition, logic, and common sense for why yeah, we are not just this bunch of chemicals, but we are something non material. For instance, we discussed how the body's value, if we just take the chemicals that make up the body, it's not much, hardly maybe $10 to $20. But still, when one of our friends is meets with an accident in a very expensive car, we go to save the friend and not the car. Although the value of the car, the material that makes up the car, is much more than the value of the chemicals that make up our body. But still, because the Atma is still there in that body, and we want to serve the Atma, we want to attend to the needs of the Atma first. And yeah, once the Atma leaves the body, no matter what, with all our scientific advancement, no matter what we may try to do, reverse the reaction in the body, whatever reaction led to death, we cannot do anything to reverse that and bring that person back to life. Why? Because it's the Atma that has left the body. If we were just a bunch of chemicals, then yeah, why not reverse some reaction and then make people alive again? Everyone would like to have such a technology. And then, yeah, we also discussed Dr. Penfield's experiment. My hand, I put my hand up in the first instance, and in the second instance, the subject said, my hand went up. So, yeah, you may refer to the second session to recap what this experiment was about. And then, yeah, we also discussed how this knowledge can help us. It can help us in so many ways. We just discussed a few of them. For instance, this knowledge can help us rise above superiority or inferiority complex over our physical appearance and so on. Oh, I look so good. I look better than him. Oh, I don't look so good. I look as good as her. So this kind of superiority or inferiority complex actually is not beneficial for a living being. Even superiority complex is not beneficial for a living being. Why? Because when inevitably we see in this world that whatever things we may be proud of, we may feel arrogant about, in due course of time, we cannot cling on to them forever. And when they go away from us, when we no more have them, the degree to which we feel arrogant about them or proud about having them, to that degree we have a hard fall when we realize that we cannot hold on to them perpetually. So, yeah, so this knowledge can help us in so many ways. We discussed many other points, how this knowledge can help us not get affected when we lose something, how this knowledge can help us not get affected when seeing all the fast moving changes around in this world, fast changing fashions and fast changing technologies. Those who are software engineers would know that how much anxiety it creates when all technical subjects that we study soon get outdated within a span of a few years, and how much we have to stay on top of things. And then we also saw some inspiring personalities from the past who, uh, based on self realization and God realization, lived their lives and how wonderful their lives were. Does someone remember whose example this is displayed on the screen? If you see this picture, there's a small boy, and so many attempts are being made to kill him using weapons, using poisonous snakes, and so on. And yeah, that boy was completely fearless because he was fully absorbed in self realization and God realization. And who is this boy? As you may recall from the last session, this is none other than Bhakt Prahlad, who is so glorified, profusely glorified in the Vedic literatures. Now, based on our previous session, a small quiz question for you. Please choose one of the following. Would you say, I am the body, or would you say, I use the body? Just one of these two options you have to select. There's no third option. What would you select? So, yeah, based on what the Gita informs us, we are not the body, but we use the body. We live in the body. Hmm? It's not that I am the body and there's something called Atma, which is like a battery that charges me. And when the battery leaves, I am discharged and I cannot function anymore. No, it's not that. Uh, Atma is just something that's helping us exist. We are the Atma. Hmm? And we are using the body. We are living in the body. Hmm? And then now with this question, we enter into today's topic. Again, please choose one of the following two. I am the mind or I use the mind. What do you think? Which of these is true? Now, based on the previous session, as we discussed, we are not just a bunch of chemicals. We are something non-material. But then, are we the mind with which we think? So that's the next question we have. So am I the mind or I use the mind? Which of these is true? Okay, don't worry about what answer you chose, even if it's correct or not correct. That's perfectly okay. Let's see what the Gita has to inform us. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, text 4, Lord Krishna beautifully says, Bhumirapo nalo vayuhu khammano buddhirev cha ahankara iti yamme bhinna prakritirashtadha. Krishna says, earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. Altogether, these eight constitute my separated material energies. So, Krishna is calling mind, intelligence, and false ego. Of course, it makes sense. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, these five elements. By the way, just to give a small background, in modern science, we study elements in the form of a periodic table, beginning with hydrogen, helium, and then oxygen, and so on. Right? Is that correct? Yeah, I think hydrogen, helium, oxygen, and so on. I don't remember after that. School chemistry, have lost touch with it for a long time. Um, However, the Vedic literatures, they categorize all matter, all material elements into these five. Earth, which means all solids basically. This table is also earth. The chair on which you and I are sitting are also, if at all you are sitting right now. The table, the chair, everything around that has a solid form is earth. Then water, anything liquid is water. Then there's fire. So then there's air. Air can be perceived with its motion, and we can feel the touch of air on our skin. And then there's ether. Ether is technically, we can think of it as vacuum. Now, Krishna is calling that also as material energy. Now, according to our conception, vacuum may look like, oh, there's nothing out there. But still, Krishna says that's a part of the material realm. It's a material energy. And then what to speak of that? Mind, intelligence, and false ego. Krishna is calling these three things also as material. These are his material energies, Krishna is saying. And we'll see what these three are specifically: mind, intelligence, and false ego. Now, in the next verse, Krishna says, the very next verse, 7.5, Apareyamitastvanyam prakritim viddhi me param jiva bhutam mahabaho yaedam dharyate jagat. Krishna says, besides by these, Krishna is referring to the eight things he spoke about in the previous verse. So besides these 8, O mighty armed Arjun, there is another superior energy of mind which comprises the living entities. So Krishna is calling living entities, the living force, the Atma, as the superior energy. Whereas Krishna is calling earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego as material energy, and it's separated from the actual living force, from the realm of spirit, from the spiritual realm. So, yeah, now, yeah. So, what does it basically mean? We are different from our mind. That's what the Gita is informing us. We are not even our mind. Now, we may say, okay, fine, the Gita says that, but yeah, how do we understand it with some logic? So here's some simple logic to understand how we are different from our mind. If we were precisely the mind, then yeah, when we say, oh, I want to control and tame my mind, then who is it that is trying to control the mind? If we are the mind, then yeah, there's no point when we say, it's pointless to say, I want to control and tame my mind. So when we say, I want to control my mind, I want to make my mind more peaceful, I want to make my mind more satisfied. So, yeah, what does it mean? It it's certainly indicative of our existence being beyond matter and separate from the mind specifically. Then another point we can consider is, yeah, we all want to be happy, but yet sometimes we see that our mind may appear to militate against our own real self-interests and our real happiness. We may want to forget something, but the mind stubbornly clings on to that thing as if not cooperating with us. We may want to remember something, but the mind doesn't allow us to remember. Yeah, so it appears the mind sort of sometimes it appears to militate against our own self-interests and our happiness. Now, just to introduce some humor, we'll see some funny videos to illustrate the nature of the mind. We often use the word, we compare our mind with one particular animal. Would someone like to think about that and come up with an answer? We often say monkey mind, right? So yeah, let's go ahead and see a few videos to understand this, to understand the monkey nature of our mind. Okay, so here's one video. There's a monkey that is engaged in some dangerous sport. Literally, this monkey is playing with tigers. In this video, it doesn't show that the monkey gets caught by the tigers, but it's quite a dangerous game the monkey is playing. The video resolution is not that good. An old video. The tiger almost caught the monkey. But still, the monkey was on with its play. Pull the ears of the tiger. Okay, yeah. So just the message was idle mind, devil's workshop. Another video on the mind. Again, idle mind, devil's workshop. How it can happen in driving. Hmm. Okay. And then here's one more. A restless and a stressed mind at office. A restless mind that has no proper engagement.
Quitting smoking is not easy. If you are serious about it, talk to your doctor.
Okay. Yeah, just some videos to introduce some humor into the session so that you don't get bored with the topic. Okay. Now, here we come back to our discussion on. So, Krishna described these 8 elements in 7.4, and then in verse 7.5, Krishna talks about the superior energy, which comprises the living entities, basically the Atmas, the real living force. So, Jeev, as Krishna calls it, Jiva Bhutam Mahabaho, Yayedam Dharite Jagat. So, here we see that now let's just come back to the 8 elements that Krishna spoke about, 8 items in 7.4. So our bodies are made of the first 5 elements Krishna speaks about: earth, water, fire, air, ether. These 5, they constitute gross matter. Gross matter is more, it's perceivable with the gross senses, and in fact, our body itself is made of these uh, 5 elements. These 5 elements are also called as Pancha Mahabhut in the Vedic literature. So, our body itself, with its 5 sentient senses, it's made of these 5 Pancha Mahabhut: earth, water, fire, air, ether. Now, above that, or subtler than that, is mind. So, mind is even subtler than uh, the ether. Ether is vacuum. But mind is even subtler than that. And subtler than mind is something called intelligence. And subtler than intelligence is something called false ego. And it's the false ego that's closest to the Atma. Now we will see what this hierarchy means. So, mind is now psychology may have its own definition of what mind and intelligence mean, or what ego may mean. But we are seeing from the viewpoint of Vedic literatures. And so, per Vedic literatures, the mind basically is a storehouse of our thoughts and desires. And uh, yeah, it all our hankerings. It's the storehouse of our memories. So that's the mind. And the mind can often be very restless. It is said an average mind processes around more than 25,000 thoughts a day. I may have to check the figure again. I could be wrong on that. But so many thoughts come and go through our mind every single day. So that's the mind. And yeah, we can perceive what the mind is. And then higher than the mind, or more subtle than the mind, is the intelligence. And what is intelligence? Buddhi, according to the Vedic literature, like the Bhagavad Gita. Intelligence is that faculty of our internal existence, which that faculty that tells us, do this, don't do this. The faculty of discrimination. The mind may have many desires and many proposals. The mind may feel like just going and embracing some uh, member of the opposite gender, but the intelligence comes there and says, no, no, that's not okay. Not okay to do that. So the intelligence is the faculty of discrimination. And then what is false ego? To understand false ego, let's understand the definition of ego. So what does ego mean to you? Someone may say ego means one's pride over oneself. Someone may, yeah, define ego as arrogance or whatever. But essentially, the word ego itself means one's conception of oneself. But very often we use the word ego with a negative connotation, that ego means someone who has a very high conception of himself or herself, and maybe looking down upon others, maybe condescending toward others. So that's the regular conception of ego. But technically, the word ego itself means one's conception of oneself, what one thinks himself or herself to be. One may think himself or herself to be very high, and or one may think himself or herself to be too low and may be suffering from inferiority complex. So basically, ego technically means one's conception of oneself. So what is false ego now? False ego essentially means when the Atma thinks itself to be matter. When the Atma deeply identifies with matter, that is false ego. Now, this may naturally bring up this question. Is there something called true ego? Yes, there is something called true ego. And that state of true ego is essentially the state when the Atma realizes that I have nothing to do with the material realm. I'm not a part of the material realm, and I'm a spiritual being, and I'm beyond the purview of matter and beyond the purview of time, the time factor that moves things and brings things to destruction. So we may have different conceptions of time. One conception of time is what's the time right now? It's 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. Another context in which time is used is, how much time do you have? I just have 10 minutes. Come on, quickly, get ready. That's another context in which we use the word time. But then a deeper notion of time is that unseen force, which is difficult to perceive with gross senses, but yet it surely exists. We can all surely conclude that such a factor exists, and that is the time factor which moves things around. And it makes various phenomena happen. It makes a small baby into a baby girl into a beautiful young woman, and then that same time factor pushes that young woman toward old age, and then just like grapes become raisins. So beautiful women or young handsome men may also their skin gets withered. It's all happening under the influence of time. Now, it's material energy that's under the influence of time, but the Atma is non-material. It is, according to the understanding of Bhagavad Gita, it's beyond time and it's beyond the material realm altogether. So true ego is when the Atma realizes, basically the Atma comes to a state of self-realization and God realization. So that is the state of true ego. But what is false ego? It's that element which enables the Atma to almost so deeply get mingled with the realm of matter that the Atma is living under the conception that I am this material body. I am a part of this material realm and everything ends at death. So just enjoy life to the maximum before death. So that is the conception called, this kind of conception comes under false ego. Now, just an additional thought on intelligence. In modern terminology, we may say someone is unintelligent. But according to Vedic understanding, everyone has intelligence. Even those who, according to modern usage of the word intelligence or buddhi, even though one person may call another person to be unintelligent, but yet intelligence is still there in all living entities. The subtle element called intelligence, the faculty of discrimination is there in all living entities, but someone's intelligence may be refined, whereas someone else's intelligence may be very corrupt. Someone who does evil things has a corrupt intelligence, whereas someone who does benevolent things has a refined intelligence, has a refined sense of discrimination. So again, the hierarchy goes as our body, which consists of the 5 sense organs, it's all made of gross matter. Then subtler than the body is our mind with which we think. And then subtler than the mind is the intelligence that can even give directions to the mind. No mind, not this. Yes, mind, this. Let's go with this. And then ego, false ego, is even subtler than intelligence. It's the next door neighbor of the Atma. And it's the false ego is that layer which it's like the glue between the Atma and the material realm, the realm of matter. Now we see some differences between the gross body and the subtle body. The gross body is made of these 5 Pancha Mahabhut: earth, water, fire, air, ether. Then what is our subtle body made of? The mind, intelligence, and false ego, that's called our subtle body. It's still a body. It's extraneous to the Atma. It's outside of the Atma. It's a covering on the Atma. So basically, we have the Atma. The immediate covering over the Atma is the subtle body made of false ego, then intelligence, then mind. And then the next covering over the subtle body is the gross body with which we are moving around in this world and going through various experiences in this world. Now, next difference between the gross and subtle body is the gross body, it withers at death. At death, we leave our gross body. As we saw in the previous session, this beautiful verse from Bhagavad Gita, 2.22. Vasansi jirnani yatha vihaya navani grihnati naroparani tatha sharirani vihaya jirnani anyani samyati navani dehi. Krishna says, just as a person changes old garments and puts on new ones, similarly the soul changes old and not usable bodies and takes on new bodies. So, and what kind of body is Krishna talking about there in 2.22? Krishna is talking about the gross body. Now, what about the subtle body? Do we leave the subtle body when we go on, when we take another rebirth? No, the subtle body still stays with us. The subtle body continues with us life after life. It withers, that is, the Atma sheds off that subtle body only at the time of an event called liberation. Does someone know the technical Sanskrit term for liberation that's there mentioned in Vedic literature? It's called moksha, as many of you may have guessed it correct. So gross body stays with us for one lifetime, but subtle body stays with us over multiple lifetimes, and it carries the Atma from one life to another. So here's one analogy from modern day-to-day life. The material gross body can be compared to hardware of a machine. Then the subtle body can be compared to the software of a machine. And the Atma itself, we, the real person, the real you, the real me, the real him and the real her, who are all Atmas, we are like the users of these bodies. There's one beautiful verse in the Bhagavad Gita, 18th chapter, 61st verse. Ishwarah sarvabhutanam hridadesherjuna tishtati Brahmayan sarvabhutani yantra rudhani mayaya. What does yantra mean? Yantra is the Sanskrit word for a machine or a device. So yantra arudhani, the Atma is sitting on this body made of material energy as if an operator is riding a yantra. So I have seen in some movies, I no more watch movies. Spiritual life itself is so enjoyable and relishable. But when I have watched movies in the past, I remember seeing in some English movies how there's a man riding on a robot, and the robot also has a human-like form, but a huge form. And the man moves certain controls and buttons inside that robot, and the robot also makes those motions, and the robot may pick up huge things and do some big things. So the Atma's role in the body is something similar. The Atma is riding on the body and living within the body and using the body. And it's the Atma's desire. The Atma desires to do something, and then the body manifests that. The Atma desires to move the hand, and yeah, the body moves the hand accordingly. So now one major difference between, this is a repetition, but worth emphasizing again. The major difference between gross and subtle body is the gross body is changed at death, but the subtle body stays with us throughout our multi-life journey in this material realm. The Atma, according to Vedic literatures, is currently in a cycle of birth and death. Taking birth, then going through one lifespan and then shedding off that body, taking another birth. So, but in this multi-life journey, the subtle body still stays with us, and the Atma sheds it off only at the time of liberation. That's a special event when the Atma goes out of that cycle of birth and death. Now, one question may come up. Well, I don't remember my past life. How can I understand that the same mind has been with me from my previous life and the same mind will continue to be with me? As long as I'm taking births and dying in this world. How do I understand this? So here the Bhagavad Gita enlightens us on this particular topic. So what is it that the subtle body carries to the next life? The Bhagavad Gita answers that for us. So for this, to get an answer to this, we'll go to the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. We'll recite some beautiful verses. Okay. So this is a trio of verses, Bhagavad Gita 15.7, 8, and 9. I'll recite the Sanskrit. You may feel free to pause and repeat after me if you like. It's very nice and it's a relishable experience reciting these beautiful verses. Mamaevamsho jivaloke jivabhutah sanatanah manah shashtanindriyani prakritisthani karshati. Krishna says in the 7th verse, the living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the 6 senses, which include the mind. So, yeah, Krishna is talking about the 5 senses, and he's including the mind as well, along with these 5 senses, and he's calling them Shashthan, with these 6, Shashthani, the 6. Indriyani. So he's sort of clubbing together the mind also as the master of all senses. Now, I'll just stop sharing my screen to show something. If we look at our hand, all 5 fingers in our hand are connected to this central portion. I don't know what it's called in biology. Our mind can be compared to this central portion to which all the 5 senses are connected. This finger, the index finger and the middle finger, they are not directly connected to each other, but they are connected to each other through this central portion. And likewise, you can take any 2 fingers. They are not directly connected to each other. And what does this mean? How in terms of our bodily senses and our mind? So one example can be given in this context. Our eyes can perceive the color of milk. Milk is white, but the nose cannot perceive the color. But the nose can perceive the smell, whereas the eyes cannot perceive the smell of milk. The tongue can perceive the taste of milk, but it cannot perceive the smell and the color of milk. But the mind can perceive all of these, because the mind, all inputs from our senses ultimately go to the mind. So the mind can perceive all of these. So the mind is like the central focal point or pivot, whatever is the exact term for that. It's the main connecting point between all senses, and it's all the senses supply their inputs to the mind ultimately. I'll start sharing the screen again. Okay, so yeah, Krishna is saying living entities in this conditioned world are struggling very hard with the 6 senses, which include the mind. The next verse, Shariram yadavapnoti yachapyutkramati grihitvaitani samyati vayurgandhani vashayat. Krishna says, the living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. He thus takes one kind of body and again quits it to take another. So what is a conception of life? Conception of life basically means what one thinks life is meant for. Suppose my conception of life is meant for partying, man. Party as hard as you can. This could be one conception of life. Someone's conception of life may be, oh, just earn money, 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 money. No matter what. By hook or by crook, just earn money. This is another conception of life. Even if I have to cheat others, it's okay. My goal of life is to earn money. This could be another conception of life. So basically, conception of life means what I think life is meant for, what I think I'm meant to do with my existence in this body. That's one's conception of life. And Krishna is giving an analogy. Just as the air carries aromas from one spot to another, similarly, uh, when the living entity leaves one body and goes to another body, the living entity carries his or her conceptions of life from one body to another. So that answers our question. Uh, what was our question? Well, if we are carrying the same subtle body from one life form to another, how do we understand that? I don't specifically remember my past life. So um, how do I understand that I'm carrying the same subtle body? So here Krishna says, we do carry the same subtle body, but specific memories are wiped out. Hmm? But we still carry the conception of life from one body to another. Hmm? The mind, uh, the subtle body, basically, mind, intelligence, false ego, in that, the Atma, the Jiva, still carries his or her conceptions of life. Hmm? And what do these conceptions of life do to the, how do they shape one's next body? Let's see. And so Krishna has said here, the living entity carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. Thus, he takes one kind of body and again quits it to take another. Now, when he is said here, please, it doesn't mean it applies only to men. This applies to both the genders, his as well as her. Of course, sometimes we may put his slash her everywhere, but yeah, sometimes uh, people just mention one of the genders. It doesn't mean the other gender is excluded. Okay, now next verse. श्रोत्रं चक्षुः स्पर्शनं च रसनं घ्राणमेव च अधिष्ठाय मनश्चायम् उपया विषयानुपसेवते. Krishna says, the living entity, thus taking another gross body, obtains a certain type of ear, eye, tongue, nose, and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind. He thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. What a beautiful verse. Personally, I have derived so much inspiration from this verse. It helps me deal with temptations in so many ways. Um, yeah. Now, what is Krishna saying here? Based on the conception one carried in his or her subtle body from last life to this life, based on that conception, basically the subtle body and with all its desires and longings and aspirations and inclinations, the subtle body carries that from one life to another. The subtle body does not carry specific memories of past life. And as we saw in the previous session, it's by the benevolent arrangement of nature that we don't remember our past lives. In most cases, it's the benevolent arrangement. And in cases when there are strong memories of past life, yeah, there may be some other reason. Of course, we cannot exactly pinpoint why someone remembers their past life. What is the purpose of the higher authorities, the orchestrator, the creator, God? What is God's purpose in making someone remember his or her past life, whereas in making everyone else forget their past life? At least we can understand. Forgetting past life is by the benevolent arrangement of nature and of God. But even remembering past life could sometimes be by benevolent arrangement of God. Why? Because sometimes those past life memories may help bring something to justice. Say someone was murdered and very unjustly murdered, and then next life that person comes back in the form of another nearby and then that person reveals how he was murdered, and then justice is done to all those people who felt the pain of losing that person who was murdered. And then justice is done to even those criminals who murdered that person. Just a random example I gave. So even though we may not carry our specific memories, we do carry our inclinations, aspirations, desires, longings, and so on. And then what happens when the subtle body carries that? The subtle body acts like a template, just like our body essentially is made of a basic skeleton. We have a skeleton, and on top of that, there's flesh studded on top of that, kind of a thing we can imagine. So similarly, the subtle body forms the template or the skeleton on top of which a gross body is made. Nature awards a gross body according to the desires and longings that an Atma is carrying in the subtle body when moving from one life form to another. And what happens based on that? Based on whatever template or skeleton exists in the subtle body of that living entity, the living entity gets a gross body, and then the living entity gets a certain type of ear, eye, tongue, nose, and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind, as we saw this five-finger analogy. And now this verse can lead to very deep realizations. So, right now, say for example, considering myself, I sometimes observe my life in this, from the view or perspective of this verse. Right now, I'm in a male body. I don't know what specific inclinations I had which brought me into this male human body. But in a male human body, usually attraction is toward a female body. So because right now the senses, the male ears, eyes, tongue, nose, and sense of touch that come with a male human body. So these senses have attraction to certain sense objects. Going back to our verse, Krishna says he thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. We come with a particular set of senses, and those senses have affinity to a certain type of sense objects. So the male body that I came with, or someone may have come with another human male body or another human female body. The kind of body we come with and the group of senses we come with that have affinity to a certain type of sense objects. What is a sense object? A sense object is something that gives gratification or pleasure to the senses. So for someone in a male body, a female body is a female form is attractive to the senses. Whereas someone who is in a female body, that group of senses in which that particular Atma is living, the female body and the female group of senses inside which that Atma is living, they have affinity to a male body. Whereas a male dog has no attraction to a beautiful human woman. So a dog is not bothered about who is Miss Universe, Miss World, and all that. For a dog, he is attracted to a bitch. So, this is amazing, isn't it? Based on what conception of life we carry from one body to another, based on that, that forms the template for our next body. And we accordingly get a group of senses which are grouped around the mind. And then based on whatever body type we have received, we enjoy a particular set of sense objects. So, and likewise, if I, instead of being born in a male human form, if I was born in some other species, then female humans wouldn't have looked attractive. So the opposite gender of that particular species would have looked attractive. So if we see this kind of attraction, it's based on the type of body one gets. It's not an absolute attraction, but we are going to see in future. There is one absolute attraction that the Atma has. Right now, our attractions and repulsions that we feel, the senses in specific, they are attracted to certain sense objects and they feel repelled by certain other sense objects. For example, we feel repelled by stool, but pigs or hogs, they feel attracted by stool. They eat stool. Amazing, isn't it? Stool is it's repulsive to our senses, but for a pig's senses, it's attractive. So these attractions and repulsions, they are relative, but there's one absolute attraction, which we are going to see in future. All Atmas feel one absolute attraction. And that attraction is, in fact, we are going to see in this slide. That attraction is toward the Param Atma. We will see that. Okay, now coming back to our slideshow. Okay, so in conclusion, while we don't carry specific memories from one life to another, we certainly do carry our inclinations and desires. And these inclinations and desires give us shape to our next life. And in 1 or 2 sessions from now, I think 2 sessions, we are going to have one full session on what is karma and what are the laws of karma. So in that session, we will get a complete picture. It will complement this discussion. So basically, just for now, in our in-person session, someone had asked this question about how exactly transmigration from one body to another works. So we can remember this with 2 simple Ds. One D is desire and second D is deserve. So what we desire and what we deserve is what forms the basis of our next body. I may desire something very lofty, but if I don't deserve it, then I won't get it. And on the other hand, I may be deserving of something, but if I'm not interested in it, if I don't desire it, then naturally, I won't go for it. I won't get it. So desire and deserve, this is what forms the basis of transmigration into another body. In today's session, we have mainly focused on the desire part of it. The deserve part of it, it's another topic altogether. It will be covered in the laws of karma session. Okay, now here's one small digression. Okay, all this discussion is okay, but why is Krishna boasting so much here? Boasting, we have put it under quote unquote. So is Krishna really boasting here? Let's see that. Now, here's one question for you. What exactly does Bhagavad Gita mean? The title, what does it mean? The song of God. Bhagwan ne gaya hua geet. Bhagwan's Geet, the song of God. So, who is speaking in the Bhagavad Gita? Krishna is speaking. And now, if in the Bhagavad Gita, we also get to see Krishna's special position as the Supreme Atma. We combine these 2 words, Param and Atma. And in Sanskrit, 2 words can be combined to make 1 word. And there's a common term you may have heard this term. And that is Param Atma, Paramatma. It becomes 1 word, Paramatma. So in future sessions, we will see what does Paramatma mean, and we will see Krishna's special position as the Supreme Atma or Paramatma. And when Krishna speaks anything about himself, it's not boasting, because it's an objective truth that Krishna is speaking. in the Bhagavad Gita. And suppose somebody who has a lot of wealth and he or she speaks very proudly about it, then we may call that as boasting. Why? Because it's a no living entity can hold on to anything permanently. So when someone feels proud about some temporary asset or possession, then we call that as boasting, because it's not a permanent reality. But when Krishna speaks about it, it's not that what Krishna is speaking holds true only for some time, some temporary time. Krishna is speaking about some timeless truths, and objectively presenting it. And so this cannot be called boasting. And another example will make it clearer. So far, it may still be a little vague. Oh, still it looks like boasting. But this example may probably fit the pieces together for you. At least it did for me. So suppose someone asks a great saint some questions about higher truths about God and so on. The saint will naturally speak about God. But the Bhagavad Gita is a special episode in human history where someone is asking questions to God. So naturally, God speaks. God speaks about how everything is in connection and is orchestrated by God. So, this, we don't see this as boasting in any way. Okay, now coming back to our topic. Now, someone had brought up this question: are there evil Atmas? This question had come up in the previous session on Atma. Because, we see some Atmas acting in good ways, some Atmas not acting in good ways in this world. Ultimately, everyone is an Atma, every living entity is an Atma. So, naturally, this question may come up. Are there evil Atmas? Let's see. On the slideshow, we see the picture of one famous personality from the history. So, we may have such personalities in our mind when this question comes up. Are there evil Atmas? So, this is Adolf Hitler, the famous personality from World War II. Now, let's discuss one beautiful episode from the Ramayana. In the Ramayana, as you may know, the final battle was between Lord Shri Ram and the king of Lanka, or the king of the race of demons called Ravan. Finally, Lord Ram, what a battle it was. Ravan's army was completely equipped with all types of advanced weapons, and those weapons were even infused with mystical potencies. They could do black magic, and whereas the army of Lord Shri Ram consisted of Vanaras, and other than a few Vanaras like Hanumanji and a few others, Angad and so on, most of them just use their raw strength and picking up trees and boulders, and they were fighting the war with some crude weapons. But still, finally, Lord Ram came victorious. And after Ravan was slain, Lord Ram came to... Now, one question for you. Who was the virtuous brother of Ravan, who some time back before this battle had left Ravan because he knew Ravan was walking down the wrong path? And he came to the side of Lord Ram. Who was that virtuous brother of Ravan? It was Vibhishan. So after Ravan was slain, Lord Ram comes to Vibhishan and he says to Vibhishan, "Oh, Vibhishan, now that Ravan has also lost all his sons in the battle, because in this battle, this was a victory of virtue over vice, victory of good over evil. So all those who were on the side of evil, they were vanquished. And yeah, all relatives of Ravan, they except Vibhishan, they were all on the side of vice and um, supporting evil activities. And they had a track record of committing so many atrocious activities toward innocent living beings. So, yeah, everyone was vanquished in that battle. So, Lord Ram comes to Vibhishan and says, now that Ravan has no sons or any other, he has lost all his sons. So, you being his younger brother, why don't you perform his last rites? So Vibhishan, he says, no, my dear Lord, he was such a cruel person. He committed so many nasty, sinful activities. He was so atrocious toward other living entities, and he was so offensive toward you, oh Lord. I don't think he deserves last rites. Now, hear what Lord Ram said. My dear Vibhishan, no, when all these activities, Ravan, now now that the gross body is dead, these activities are gone, done with that gross body. But the last rites we perform are for the benefit of the Atma. So, yeah, please go ahead and do the last rites of of Ravan. And then Vibhishan follows what Lord Ram says. So can you imagine? Lord Ram has absolutely no grudge against Ravan. So Lord Ram is seeing Ravan from a spiritual perspective. He is thinking of the benefit of the Atma who temporarily lived in that body of Ravan. And yeah, in that body, that Atma performed so many wrong deeds. But Lord Ram is seeing from a spiritual perspective. Now we come to this question. Then what is it that makes some Atmas act in evil ways and some of them in good ways? Where exactly do the contaminations lie? So based on our session today, yeah, we have the answer based on what the Vedic literatures inform us. The contaminations lie in the subtle body. And now, here we come to an interesting discussion on ghosts. What is the existence of ghosts what is it composed of? So, now, yeah, many of us, we may have seen some TV shows on haunting and all that. And yeah, we may even dismiss their existence. And yeah, it's actually good not to think about all that because yeah, it can destabilize a person thinking about such things. But yet, to objectively discuss, yeah, the talks or thoughts about ghosts can make us uncomfortable. But still, does it mean, and we may try to dismiss those thoughts and remove them from our mind, but does it mean they don't objectively exist? Even so many channels like Discovery and so on, I remember in the past, Discovery Channel used to have a show on some haunting, some sort of haunted houses and so on. So even people who may not care about what Vedic literatures, what the Bhagavad Gita and all say, but still they do recognize the existence of haunted houses. So, okay, so what does the existence of ghosts, what is it composed of? So basically, ghosts are Atmas who still have a subtle body filled with many contaminated desires, but they have no gross body to express those desires. So someone may die and yeah, before they get a new body, and they are not still completely purified of that subtle body. They still have so many desires and but just that they haven't yet gotten a new body. So for the time being, they live in the form of ghosts. And now, not all ghosts may be bad, but those ghosts who have many contaminated desires, but no gross body to express those desires, yeah, they may act as evil ghosts and try to possess someone, try to harm someone, try to use someone. But there may be some good ghosts also whose subtle body is not filled with contaminated desires. They may have been virtuous people in the past when they had gross bodies and when they lived as a human being or whatever. But right now, for some reason, they still haven't received their next gross body and they are living in that uh, ghostly form, but they don't harm somebody. So, anyways, we didn't intentionally put pictures of ghosts here, so that we want you to have good sleep. Okay. Now, yeah, besides these, yeah, so we discussed that subtle body is where the contaminations may lie. And we discussed an example of ghosts that don't have a gross body, but they do have a subtle body. And in that subtle body, they carry contaminated desires. But besides that, are there any other factors that, yeah, that can make atmas act in some evil ways? And yeah, where the contaminations lie. So in the next session, we will see how there are external contaminating factors that living entities can choose to subscribe to. We will see that in the next session. And now here we come to an interesting analogy given by the Vedic literature. Our existence can be compared to a chariot. There are 5 horses that take this chariot around. And these 5 horses can be compared to our 5 senses: ears, eyes, tongue, nose, and the sense of touch. And the rope that controls these 5 horses, that's compared to the mind. And the chariot driver who holds that rope is compared to the intelligence. And we, the Atma, the real person, is compared to the passenger who is sitting in this chariot. Now, if you see in this image specifically represents a bewildered Atma. If you see the passenger sitting in this chariot is in a pretty much bewildered state. So this represents the chariot of material existence in a bewildered state. When the senses and mind, they are uncontrolled and they easily succumb to temptations, are very vulnerable to external contaminating factors, and themselves carry lots of contaminated desires and aspirations, then the chariot has no proper direction. And the intelligence also is bewildered, though the intelligence has control over the rope and the horses, but still the intelligence of when the Atma is living in a bewildered state, such intelligence is contaminated, and that intelligence justifies how the senses and the mind, such intelligence justifies all their activities and condones them. And in such a state of existence, the Atma lives in a bewildered state, almost as if it has no control. But the Bhagavad Gita gives us hope here. Knowing that you are the Atma, Krishna says toward the end of the Bhagavad Gita, Indriyani Paranyahur, I'm forgetting the exact next part, but Krishna gives us hope there. That knowing yourself to be the Atma, to be higher than the intelligence, the mind, and the senses, take charge of your life and take the direction of your life, take the chariot of your existence in the right direction. So knowing ourselves to be higher than the gross senses and the mind, we can actually take charge of our existence. There's so much in our control. There's so much we can do to give a proper direction to our life. But for that, we will see. For that, we have to purify the intelligence. And we will see what enables us to do that. So what is the recommended process to ride this chariot? Spiritual knowledge and spiritual practices. These are two things. They go parallelly, just like the tracks of a railway. Spiritual knowledge and spiritual practices go parallelly, and they purify the subtle body. They can make such a huge difference in our life that they can liberate the Atma out of the cycle of birth and death. Even if we don't manage to get liberation with the help of our spiritual knowledge and spiritual practices, these two things, they at least guarantee a good next birth in a well-situated atmosphere from where one can continue. In the Bhagavad Gita, there's a beautiful text. Neha bhikrama nashosti pratyavayo na vidyate swalpamapyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. Krishna says, in this endeavor, this refers to a spiritual endeavor. In this endeavor, there is no loss or diminution. And a little advancement on this path can protect one from the greatest type of fear. So any spiritual assets we may gain in our life are not lost at death. But any material assets we may gain, they are lost at death. Even if someone may be as intelligent as Einstein in one particular life, in the next life, one has to begin again with A, B, C, D. But spiritual assets are never lost. So, at the end of the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Arjun himself asks this question. Oh, my dear Lord Krishna, what's the fate of someone who took to spiritual life but couldn't successfully complete it? Such a person missed out on so many material enjoyments and also couldn't achieve spiritual perfection. So in Hindi, there's a saying, no, na ghar ka, na ghat ka. One achieved neither this nor this. So what's the hope for such a person? And let's see the hope-giving answer that Lord Krishna gives. We'll hear a small audio for this. It's a video, rather.
Do you know the US solar company's nasty little secret? It turns out they'd have to give you solar panels for
Okay.
everything to keep this away.
O mighty armed Krishna, does not such a man who is bewildered from the path of transcendence fall away from both spiritual and material success and perish like a riven cloud with no position in any sphere? This is my doubt, O Krishna, and I ask you to dispel it completely. But for you, no one is to be found who can destroy this doubt. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Son of Pritha, a transcendentalist engaged in auspicious activities does not meet with destruction either in this world or in the spiritual world. One who does good, my friend, is never overcome by evil. The unsuccessful yogi, after many, many years of enjoyment on the planets of the pious living entities, is born into a family of righteous people, or into a family of rich aristocracy, or, if unsuccessful after long practice of yoga, he takes his birth in a family of transcendentalists who are surely great in wisdom. Certainly such a birth is rare in this world. On taking such a birth, he revives the divine consciousness of his previous life, and he again tries to make further progress in order to achieve complete success, O son of Kuru. By virtue of the divine consciousness of his previous life, he automatically becomes attracted to the yogic principles, even without seeking them. Such an inquisitive transcendentalist stands always above the ritualistic principles of the scriptures, and when the yogi engages himself with sincere endeavor in making further progress, being washed of all contaminations, then ultimately, achieving perfection after many, many births of practice, he attains the supreme goal. A yogi is greater than the ascetic, greater than the empiricist, and greater than the fruitive worker. Therefore, O Arjun, in all circumstances, be a yogi. And of all yogis, the one with great faith, who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental loving service to me, He is the most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. That is my opinion.
Okay, back to our session. By the way, I may have forgotten to mention one thing. A few slides back, we were discussing how the attraction that the senses may have to sense objects it's quite relative. But all Atmas have one absolute attraction. And that attraction is toward the Paramatma, Param Atma, the Supreme Atma. We are going to see that in another 2 or 3 sessions. Now, next, so what we are doing right now, trying to understand the Bhagavad Gita, that constitutes spiritual knowledge. And then spiritual practices, what does that constitute? Mainly, now again, sometimes it may be difficult to differentiate between spiritual knowledge and spiritual practice. Practice can also help us grow in knowledge, and then knowledge further enhances our practice. So it's a virtuous cycle. One thing mutually enhancing the other. So just like there's vicious cycle, this is a virtuous cycle. Spiritual knowledge helps with spiritual practices, and spiritual practices help with spiritual knowledge. So here are 3 main limbs that are highly recommended for this age of Kali Yuga. This age is called Kali Yuga, which is known as the age of quarrel, hypocrisy, and so much degradation. Even though, yes, technology and so many things are advancing, but still the values by which human beings live, we see that they are breaking apart. So in this age of Kali Yuga, the Vedic scriptures recommend these 3 processes, especially the first one, I would like to highly emphasize. This is mantra meditation, chanting the names of God. So this is the recommendation of this age of Kali. Sound has a very powerful effect on somebody's consciousness. Many experiments have been performed, even in science, to show how when certain plants are exposed to different types of sound vibrations, plants that are exposed to spiritual sound vibrations, like mantras, they grow so wonderfully. And whereas plants that are exposed to very bad and dirty sound vibrations, which anyone who hears them, his or her mind will be agitated. So even plants, they also don't grow properly when they are exposed to such sound vibrations. And the names of God are considered to be the purest of all sound vibrations. So mantra meditation is a very powerful form of meditation where we chant the names of God. And mantra specifically, the word mantra in Sanskrit means manah trayate iti mantra. Man means mind and trayate means that which delivers the mind. So mantra is sound vibration that delivers the mind from its anxieties, its misgivings, its tribulations, its unnecessary imaginations. Mantra is something that can uplift the mind. And then second is tasting the sweetness of scriptures. In scriptures, we consider them to be divine revelations. The Bhagavad Gita itself, the title itself means the song of God, the words of God. So, and scriptures are so filled with wonderful, nourishing and uplifting and sweet messages that can really uplift mankind. And thirdly, listening to spiritually advanced souls. This process is called Shravanam. And it's quite easy to do. We may be cooking and we can listen to some recordings that give us exposure to the words of spiritually advanced souls. If you like, you can contact us. We'll be happy to share a lot of material with you. I myself follow this practice. I try to do it as diligently as possible. making sure not to waste any time. And yeah, while cooking, while walking from one place to another, we can tune into transcendental sound vibrations coming from the mouth of spiritually advanced souls. This process is called Shravanam. So, yeah, all these three together, they are so potent in helping purify the subtle body. They can take us to perfection. And we'll end with a small video. This is from the leader of our spiritual community. He lives in Silicon Valley, but he travels all over the world uh, sharing the message of Bhagavad Gita. He was born in America. He's completely American, but in his teenage, he had many questions, and he could see that Western spirituality doesn't have satisfactory answers. So he turned toward the Bhagavad Gita, and he came in contact with this beautiful chain of temples, ISKCON. He met the founder of ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada, who is such a great saint, who spread this message of Lord Krishna, of Bhagavad Gita, all over the world. So he came in contact with Srila Prabhupada, and this teacher, Vaisheshika Das, we reverently call him Vaisheshika Prabhu. He has been so enthusiastically sharing the message. And here's a beautiful video. I'm sure you will all like it. It's worth watching again and again. Let's dive into it.
Here's some breaking news. Stop watching breaking news. What is it? Breaking news is news that breaks your concentration from everything that's important in your life. It also breaks your heart. There's only so much shocking information that a simple human being can take in and survive emotionally in life. It's not necessary. The ancient sage Sanatana Goswami used to say, don't take teachings from someone who's motivated by profit. If they're trying to make money on you by giving you information, it means that the information is contaminated. Don't take it in. Here's what I do. I don't listen to the 24-hour news cycle. I avoid it. I watch other things that are positive. And here's what happens. Anything I need to know comes to my attention on the street. If it rises to a high enough threshold, someone will tell me about a world event that I really need to know about. 99% of breaking news is not only unnecessary, it's very disturbing. But we needn't give up hearing altogether. There are fantastical stories in the ancient Vedic wisdom literatures, like Mahabharata. The Bhagavad Gita took place on a battlefield, one of the greatest battles of all time, and during the fight, the greatest teachings of all time, the yoga teachings, were given from Krishna to Arjuna. Similarly, the Srimad Bhagavatam gives wonderful stories from the history of the world and infuses it with spiritual knowledge. We can transfer our attention from the sensationalized to that information that's altogether interesting but transformational. This is the process of Bhakti Yoga. Try tuning out the breaking news cycle for 1 month and tune in to spiritual literature and see how your mind becomes purified, happy, and also entertained. Let me know. Write to me and tell me, what kinds of literatures are you listening to that are enriching your mind and bringing you to a higher spiritual level?
Wonderful video. So, okay, now in this video, Vaisheshika Prabhu specifically emphasized the process of diving into the sweetness of scriptures, which is essentially reading, but they can also be heard in the form of audiobooks and so on. Now, the second and third point are slightly different from each other. In the second point, we are reading the scriptures. We may stop, we may think about it. But in the third point, we are listening to someone who has read scriptures, who has assimilated that message and is speaking based on that and is speaking his or her realizations. Both processes are powerful. They enhance each other. And suppose there's a paragraph written somewhere, say from Bhagavad Gita, and a machine reads that paragraph, a robot, say. But on the other hand, a spiritually realized soul reads that paragraph. It will have a different effect on the hearers. Why? Because when a spiritually realized soul is reading that same paragraph, just the voice modulations with which he or she is reading it will carry his or her convictions, and those have an effect on the listeners. And then what to speak of the spiritually realized soul expanding on that message. It's all the more effective. So yeah, listening to spiritually advanced souls is a very powerful process. And yeah, reading scriptures, that has its other wonderful benefits. When we are reading, we can pause whenever we like. We can think deeply about a message. When we are listening to someone, probably we cannot pause that person, at least in a live session. In a recording, definitely we can pause. But yet, yeah, both processes, they are wonderful and irreplaceable. One cannot replace the other. So both processes have been given significance and importance in Vedic literatures. So the second process, tasting the sweetness of scriptures by reading them, diving into them, it's technically called Swadhyaya. And the third process is called Shravana. And all these three processes, mantra meditation, Swadhyaya, and Shravanam, they are very uplifting. They purify the subtle body. They can literally take the Atma out of the cycle of birth and death. And saints who have applied themselves to these three processes, they have been able to even deliver ghosts from their trapped state of existence. The history shows many examples of this. Time doesn't permit us to go too much into detail over that topic of how saints have delivered even ghosts trapped in that state of existence. And yeah, what to speak of living human beings. Saints in the past have shared these three processes with living human beings and at the same time delivered ghostly beings as well through these three processes. So yeah, these three are very powerful. A lot of things we have spoken right now may have sounded a little repetitive, but yeah, we prefer repetition over skipping any of these important points. Now, before we end, we'll just try some mantra meditation for a minute or so. So this Hare Krishna Mahamantra, it's consisting of three words arranged in a beautiful pattern. Hare refers to the energy, the supremely enchanting energy, spiritual energy. And Krishna refers to the all-attractive, omnipotent, supreme being. And Ram refers to the reservoir of all pleasure. So when we connect, when we chant this Hare Krishna mantra, it's also called the Maha Mantra. We are connecting with supreme divinity in both its masculine as well as feminine form. We certainly believe in a personal form of divinity and not just a vague conception of divinity. And that personal form of divinity can be very effectively approached through this mantra, through this chanting. And let's chant a few mantras. Let's chant 10 mantras. First, let's take a deep breath. Please sit in a good place where there are no distractions around. Sit comfortably. Try folding your legs and sitting. It's recommended to sit that way rather than stretching legs, or sitting on a couch. Those kind of sitting postures may lead to some laziness, but sitting straight with back erect on the floor with folded legs can be very helpful. These sitting postures do have a subtle effect on our mind. And now let's take a deep breath. Inhale, please. And now exhale. Now let's chant 10 mantras together. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Now please keep your eyes closed for a few seconds and chant the mantra. Continue chanting in your mind 3 times. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Okay, now feel free to slowly open your eyes. Thank you so much for being attentive in this session. Take care. Have a nice day.